The crimson stain spread across the bedsheets like a blooming desert rose as Francesca Walters clutched her abdomen, her screams fading into silent tears. It was 1879 in Georgetown, Colorado, a mining town nestled in the Rocky Mountains, where silver veins ran through the earth like the blood now seeping from her body. This was her third loss in as many years, and as the midwife's face grew grave, Francesca felt herself slipping away, not just physically but spiritually. The door to the modest cabin burst open, bringing with it a gust of autumn wind and the sound of heavy boots. Austin Morgan, still in his dust-covered work clothes, rushed to her bedside, his normally stoic face contorted with fear. "I came as fast as I could," he said, dropping to his knees beside the bed. His calloused hands, usually so confident with the reins of his horse or the handle of a pistol, now trembled as they reached for hers. The midwife, Mrs. Holloway, a stern woman with eyes that had witnessed too many tragedies, placed a weathered hand on Austin's shoulder. "She's losing too much blood. I've done all I can, Mr. Morgan." Francesca's face was as pale as the winter's first snow, her lips bloodless as she whispered, "I'm sorry, Austin. I failed again." Austin's jaw tightened, his eyes glinting with unshed tears. With gentle firmness he dismissed Mrs. Holloway, promising to come for her if needed. When they were alone, he carefully climbed onto the bed, cradling Francesca's frail body against his chest, mindful of her pain. "You listen to me, Franny," he said, his voice breaking despite his effort to stay strong. "You're enough for me. You've always been enough." Francesca closed her eyes as tears slid down her temples and into her hair. "But you wanted children so badly." "I want you more," Austin said firmly, pressing his lips to her forehead. "Just live, Franny, just live." Their love story hadn't begun like most. 4 years earlier, Austin Morgan had arrived in Georgetown with little more than a horse, a gun, and a determination to make his fortune in the silver mines that had brought prosperity to Colorado territory. At 32, he had already lived several lifetimes cowhand in Texas, scout for the Army, and briefly, a lawman in a Kansas town too small to remember. Francesca Walters had been 26 when they met, already considered a spinster by the standards of the day. The daughter of the town's late doctor, she had inherited his knowledge of medicine and his small house near the edge of town. After his death, she had survived by helping Mrs. Holloway with births and treating minor ailments, though the new town doctor looked down on her woman's medicine. Their first meeting had been anything but romantic. Austin had brought in a fellow miner with a deep gash across his palm, the result of a careless moment with a pickaxe. The doctor was away, tending to the mine owner's wife, and Austin had been directed to Miss Walters' cabin as a last resort. "I need a doctor, not a nurse," he had said gruffly when she opened the door, the injured miner leaning heavily against him. Francesca had simply raised an eyebrow, her gaze taking in the blood-soaked handkerchief wrapped around the man's hand. "And he needs stitches, not opinions. Bring him in." Austin had watched in reluctant admiration as she cleaned, stitched, and bandaged the wound with efficiency and skill. Her hands were steady, her instructions clear, and her manner no nonsense. When she finished, she had looked up at Austin with clear blue eyes that seemed to see right through him. "That'll be $1, she said. "Unless you'd like to question my abilities further, in which case it's 2. That first dollar was now framed on the wall of their cabin, a reminder of how their story began. Now, as Austin held his bleeding wife in their bed, he remembered all they had been through. Their courtship had been brief but intense, with Francesca initially resistant to his advances. She had built her independence in a world that offered women few choices and was reluctant to surrender it. But Austin had never asked her to stop her healing work, only to include him in her life. "We'll get through this," he whispered, stroking her hair, matted with sweat. "We've weathered worse." Francesca didn't respond, her breathing shallow. The reality of their situation settled over Austin like the heavy snow that would soon blanket the mountains around Georgetown. He needed help, more help than Mrs. Holloway could provide. The town doctor, Dr. Hammond, was their only hope, despite his disdain for Francesca's work. "I'm going to get the doctor," Austin said, gently laying Francesca back against the pillows. "He won't come," she murmured. "Not for me." "He'll come," Austin said with such quiet certainty that Francesca knew someone, likely Dr. Hammond, would regret it if he refused. The night air was biting as Austin strode through the streets of Georgetown. The mining town was still lively despite the late hour, with saloons and gambling halls spilling light and noise onto the muddy Main Street. Austin ignored the calls from friends and acquaintances as he made his way to the doctor's house, a handsome two-story building that stood as a testament to the lucrative nature of being the only physician in a prosperous mining town. Dr. Elias Hammond answered his door in a silk smoking jacket, a glass of brandy in his hand and annoyance on his face. His expression darkened further when he recognized Austin. "Mr. Morgan, it's nearly 10 o'clock. "Office hours are. My wife is bleeding out after losing our baby," Austin cut in, his voice deadly calm. "You're coming with me now." Dr. Hammond's thin lips pressed into an even thinner line. "I understand you're distressed, but your wife chose to consort with that midwife instead of seeking proper medical care. If Mrs. Holloway can't handle the situation, perhaps—" Austin's hand shot out, gripping the doctor's lapel. "My wife," he said, each word deliberate, "is dying." "You took an oath, doctor. Now grab your bag and come with me, or, I swear on my mother's grave, you'll need a physician yourself." Something in Austin's eyes must have conveyed the gravity of his intent, because Dr. Hammond nodded stiffly, disappearing inside briefly before emerging with his medical bag. The walk back was silent, tension radiating between the two men. Austin's mind raced with prayers and promises, bargaining with God as desperate men have done since the beginning of time. When they entered the cabin, Francesca was unconscious, her skin waxy and her breathing barely perceptible. Dr. Hammond's professional demeanor took over as he examined her, his face grave. "She's lost too much blood," he said, opening his bag. "I need clean water, towels, and your assistance. And Mr. Morgan," he added, his voice softer than Austin had ever heard it, "prepare yourself for the worst. I'll do what I can, but I make no promises." The next hours were a blur of blood, hushed instructions, and the acrid smell of medicines Austin couldn't name. At some point, Mrs. Holloway returned, alerted by a neighbor concerned about the doctor's late-night visit to the Morgan cabin. Together, she and Dr. Hammond worked in tense cooperation, setting aside their professional rivalry in the face of Francesca's dire condition. Dawn was breaking over the mountains when Dr. Hammond finally stepped back from the bed, wiping his hands on a towel. "I've done all I can," he said, fatigue evident in his voice. "The bleeding has stopped, but she's very weak. The next few days will tell." He hesitated, then added, "I'm sorry about the child, Morgan. And I should have come sooner for your wife." Austin nodded, unable to form words around the lump in his throat. Mrs. Holloway patted his arm sympathetically before following the doctor out, promising to return later with broth and medicines. Alone with Francesca, Austin pulled a chair to her bedside, taking her limp hand in his. Her face was peaceful now, though frighteningly pale. He pressed his lips to her palm, tasting the salt of his own tears. "Come back to me, Franny," he whispered. "You're all I need in this world, just you." The next 3 days passed in a haze of vigil and worry. Austin left Francesca's side only when absolutely necessary, sponging her fevered brow and coaxing broth between her lips when she was conscious enough to swallow. Mrs. Holloway came twice daily, bringing food and checking Francesca's condition. Even Dr. Hammond returned, his manner more respectful as he examined Francesca and left additional medicines. On the fourth morning, Austin woke with a start, his neck stiff from sleeping in the chair. The first thing he noticed was Francesca's eyes open and clear, watching him. "You look terrible," she whispered, her voice raspy from disuse. Austin laughed, a sound of pure relief that turned halfway into a sob. "You look beautiful," he countered, reaching for her hand. "Liar," she said with the ghost of a smile. "How long have I been?" "4 days," Austin answered, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You gave me quite a scare, Mrs. Morgan." Francesca's eyes clouded. "The baby," Austin shook his head gently. "I'm sorry, Franny." Tears welled in her eyes, spilling silently down her temples. "3 times," she whispered. 3 babies we've lost. But not you," Austin said firmly. "I didn't lose you, and that's what matters most." Francesca turned her face away. "You married me 4 years ago, and I've given you nothing but heartache. No children, just loss." Her voice broke on the last word. Austin gently but firmly turned her face back to his. "You've given me everything, Francesca Morgan. Everything that matters. Do you remember what I told you when I proposed? I said I didn't need a fancy life, just a true one, with you. But you wanted children," she persisted. "I want a family," he corrected. "And you're my family, Franny. If it's just the 2 of us until we're old and gray, that's enough for me." It always has been. Francesca's recovery was slow but steady. As October turned to November, she gradually regained her strength, though a new quietness had settled over her. Dr. Hammond had been brutally honest during one of his visits after 3 losses and the severity of this last one. He believed Francesca would never carry a child to term. The damage was too extensive, the risks too great. "If you attempt to have another child," he had said, his clinical tone doing nothing to soften the blow, "I cannot guarantee your survival, Mrs. Morgan." Austin had made the decision then and there. "Then we won't," he had said firmly, ignoring Francesca's start of surprise. "My wife's life isn't something I'm willing to gamble with." Later, when they were alone, Francesca had turned troubled eyes to him. "Don't I have a say in this?" Austin had taken her hands, his expression more serious than she had ever seen it. "Franny, I've buried too many people I love. My parents, my brother in the war, won't bury you 2, not if I can prevent it." "But what about having a family?" she had asked, tears gathering in her eyes. "We are a family," he had insisted. "You and me, that's enough for me. I need you to believe that." But as the weeks passed, and Francesca's body healed, Austin could see that her heart remained wounded. She went through the motions of daily life, cooking, cleaning, even resuming some of her healing work for the women of Georgetown, but the light had gone from her eyes. December arrived with a vengeance, bringing heavy snow and bitter cold. The mountains surrounding Georgetown turned white, and the mining operations slowed as the harsher weather made work more dangerous. Austin continued his work at the Little Emma mine, coming home each evening to the warmth of their cabin but the chill of Francesca's growing melancholy. One evening in mid-December, Austin returned home to find the cabin empty. Panic seized him until he saw the note on the table. "Gone to help Mrs. Donovan with her delivery. Don't wait up. F." Relief gave way to concern. Francesca had assisted at births before, but not since her own loss. Austin stoked the fire and waited, watching as the hands of the clock crept past midnight. When the door finally opened at nearly 2 in the morning, Francesca entered in a swirl of snowflakes, her cheeks flushed with cold and something Austin hadn't seen in weeks' animation. "It's a boy," she announced, unwrapping her scarf. 8 pounds even and healthy as can be. Mrs. Donovan named him Thomas after her father. Austin smiled, helping her out of her heavy coat. "That's wonderful news. Both mother and child are well." "Perfect," Francesca said, but as she turned to hang up her coat, Austin saw the shadow cross her face. The joy of the successful birth was tinged with her own grief. "Come here," he said softly, pulling her into his arms. She came willingly, resting her head against his chest. "I'm happy for them," she said, her voice muffled against his shirt. "Truly, I am." "I know," Austin replied, stroking her hair. "You have the biggest heart of anyone I know, Franny." She looked up at him, her eyes swimming with unshed tears. "But it hurts, Austin. It hurts to know I'll never." "I know," he repeated, because there was nothing else to say. No words could heal this particular wound. That night, as they lay in bed, Francesca turned to Austin with a determination in her eyes that he hadn't seen since before her illness. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "About what you said. About us being a family, just the two of us." Austin propped himself up on one elbow, watching her carefully. And I think you're right," she said, surprising him. "But I also think there are other ways to have a family, ways that don't risk my life." Hope and caution warred in Austin's chest. "What are you suggesting?" Francesca took a deep breath. "There are children who need homes, orphans, children whose parents can't care for them." Austin considered this. The idea wasn't entirely foreign to him. His own parents had taken in a cousin's child after a cholera epidemic had swept through their Texas town. "You want to take in an orphan?" "Not just any orphan," Francesca said, sitting up now, her voice gaining strength with each word. "While I was at the Donovans, Mrs. Holloway mentioned a situation in Central City. A young woman, unmarried, due to deliver any day. She's planning to give the baby up." Austin sat up too, digesting this information. "You want to adopt her baby?" Francesca nodded, watching his face anxiously. "It wouldn't be the same as having our own, I know that. But Austin, it would be ours in all the ways that matter. A child to love, to raise." She reached for his hand. "What do you think?" Austin was quiet for a long moment, considering. The prospect both excited and terrified him. "Are you sure, Franny? Caring for another woman's child won't make you sad. Remind you of what we've lost." Francesca's hand tightened around his. "What we've lost will always be with me. But this wouldn't be about replacing our babies. It would be about creating something new. A different kind of family, but a family nonetheless." The certainty in her voice convinced him more than her words. This was the first time since her illness that Francesca had spoken with such purpose, such hope. "Then let's do it," he said, surprising himself with his decisiveness. "Let's go to Central City and meet this woman. If she's willing, we'll give her child a home." The joy that bloomed on Francesca's face was worth any uncertainty he felt. She threw her arms around his neck, kissing him with more passion than she had shown in months. "Thank you," she whispered against his lips. "Thank you for understanding." The journey to Central City took place 3 days later. The stagecoach ride was uncomfortable, the December weather making the mountain roads treacherous, but Francesca's excitement was infectious. She had spent the intervening days preparing, washing, and mending baby clothes borrowed from neighbors, rearranging their small cabin to make space for a cradle Austin had hastily commissioned from the town carpenter. Central City, another mining town just over the mountains from Georgetown, was larger and more established. Mrs. Holloway had provided a letter of introduction to a midwife there, Mrs. Abernathy, who was caring for the young expectant mother. Mrs. Abernathy proved to be a formidable woman in her 50s, with sharp eyes that assessed Austin and Francesca thoroughly before she invited them into her home. "Sarah's resting," she said, leading them to a small parlor. "The poor thing's exhausted, been in labor since yesterday morning." Francesca gasped. "She's delivering now," Mrs. Abernathy nodded grimly, "and having a hard time of it. She's young, barely 18 and small. The doctor's been by twice already." Austin felt Francesca tense beside him. He knew she was thinking of her own ordeal, the pain and the blood. He took her hand, squeezing gently. "Is there anything we can do to help?" Francesca asked, her healer's instincts overriding her personal concerns. Mrs. Abernathy seemed surprised by the offer. "You have experience with childbirth, Mrs. Morgan." "My wife has assisted at many births in Georgetown," Austin said proudly. "She learned medicine from her father, who was a doctor." The midwife's expression changed from skepticism to interest. "Is that so? Well, I could use an extra pair of hands. Sarah's been asking for her mother, poor thing, but her family disowned her when they learned of her condition." A cry from upstairs interrupted their conversation, a sound of such pain and desperation that Austin felt it like a physical blow. Francesca was on her feet immediately. "Take me to her," she said with quiet authority. "If I can help, I will." Mrs. Abernathy led Francesca upstairs, leaving Austin alone in the parlor. He paced the small room, listening to the footsteps and voices above, the occasional cry that made his heart clench. Hours passed, the winter daylight fading to dusk, then darkness. Austin declined Mrs. Abernathy's housekeeper's offer of dinner, his stomach too knotted with worry to consider food. It was past midnight when he heard a new cry, higher and more insistent than the others. The cry of a newborn taking its first breath. Austin froze, his heart hammering in his chest. A few minutes later, footsteps on the stairs announced Mrs. Abernathy's return. Her apron was stained, but her face was triumphant. "A girl," she announced. "Healthy lungs on her, as you can hear." "And the mother?" Austin asked, thinking of Francesca's fears. "Exhausted but well," Mrs. Abernathy assured him. "Your wife was a godsend, Mr. Morgan. She knew exactly what to do when things got dicey." Relief washed over Austin. "May I go up?" The midwife hesitated. "Give them a few minutes to get cleaned up. Sarah wants to speak with you both." When Austin was finally permitted upstairs, he found Francesca sitting in a chair beside the bed of a girl who looked impossibly young, with dark circles under her eyes and her brown hair plastered to her forehead with sweat. In Francesca's arms was a small bundle wrapped in a white blanket. "Austin," Francesca said softly, looking up with tear-filled eyes. "Come meet her." He approached cautiously, peering down at the tiny red face nestled in the blanket. The baby was asleep, her features scrunched and perfect. Something shifted in Austin's chest, a feeling he couldn't name. "She's beautiful," he managed, his voice rough. "Mr. Morgan," the young mother said from the bed, her voice weak but determined. "Mrs. Abernathy told me about you and your wife, that you're looking to adopt." Austin turned to her, struck by her youth and courage. "We are, Miss Sarah Miller." She attempted a smile that didn't quite reach her tired eyes. "I can't keep her. I have no husband, no means to support her. My family won't help." Her voice broke on the last words. Francesca reached out with her free hand to squeeze Sarah's. "You're very brave, Sarah. Bringing her into the world, wanting to ensure she has a good life." Sarah looked at the bundle in Francesca's arms, naked longing on her face. "I just want her to be loved, to have a chance I can't give her." "She would be loved," Austin promised, surprising himself with the depth of feeling in his voice. "Every day of her life." Sarah studied him, then Francesca, her young face solemn. "You lost babies of your own. Mrs. Abernathy told me." It wasn't a question. Francesca nodded, her eyes filling again. 3. The last one nearly took me with it. I'm sorry, Sarah said simply. I think maybe that means you'll love her even more, knowing how precious she is. We would, Francesca whispered, looking down at the sleeping infant. Sarah took a deep breath, wincing slightly at the movement. Then yes, I want you to take her, to raise her as your own, her voice wavered. But may I ask one thing, of course, Austin said, moved by her courage. Name her something beautiful, something that means something. A tear slid down her cheek. And someday, when she's old enough to understand, tell her that her birth mother loved her enough to let her go. The baby chose that moment to wake, her tiny fists waving as she began to cry. Francesca instinctively rocked her, murmuring soothing sounds. May I? Sarah asked, holding out her arms. Francesca carefully transferred the baby to her birth mother. Sarah held her close, whispering words too soft to hear, pressing a kiss to the downy head. Then, with visible effort, she handed the baby back to Francesca. Go now, she said, her voice breaking. Please, before I lose my courage. Austin put his arm around Francesca, who was crying silently as she cradled the baby. He helped her to her feet, then turned back to Sarah. We'll honor your request, he promised. She'll know she was born from love. They left Central City the next morning, after signing the necessary papers with a local judge who was a friend of Mrs. Abernathy's. The midwife had provided them with what they needed for the journey: a proper basket for the baby, milk from a local wet nurse, clean cloths. What shall we name her? Francesca asked as the stagecoach rumbled toward Georgetown, the baby sleeping peacefully in her basket between them. Austin considered, watching the winter sunlight play on the infant's face. Hope, he said finally. Let's call her Hope. Francesca's face softened. Hope Morgan, it's perfect. She reached for Austin's hand. Thank you for everything. Austin squeezed her fingers, his heart fuller than he had ever imagined possible. No, Franny, thank you for not giving up on life, on us, on having a family. The arrival of Hope Morgan in Georgetown caused quite a stir. Neighbors who had expressed sympathy over Francesca's lost pregnancies now arrived with gifts and curious glances, trying to reconcile the sudden appearance of a newborn. Francesca and Austin were honest about Hope's origins, seeing no reason for secrecy or shame. She's adopted, but she's ours in every way that matters, became their standard response. The transition to parenthood was not without challenges. Hope proved to be colicky, spending many nights crying inconsolably while Austin paced the floor with her and Francesca brewed remedies that sometimes helped and sometimes didn't. Sleep became a precious commodity, and Austin often went to work at the mine with red-rimmed eyes. But there were joys too. Hope's first real smile, the way her tiny hand wrapped around Austin's finger, the sound of Francesca singing lullabies in the rocking chair by the fire. As winter deepened into January and February, their little family settled into a rhythm, finding their way together. Spring came late to the mountains, but when it did, it transformed Georgetown. The snow melted, revealing the first brave shoots of green. The streets turned to mud, then dried in the strengthening sun. Hope grew too, her newborn fragility giving way to chubby cheeks and alert eyes that followed Francesca around the room. One evening in May, Austin returned home to find Francesca and Hope in the garden behind their cabin. Francesca was planting vegetables, while Hope lay on a blanket, kicking her legs at a mobile. Austin had carved wooden stars and moons hanging from a frame. Austin stood for a moment, watching them. The pain of the previous fall seemed distant now, replaced by a different kind of happiness than they had imagined for themselves. Not better or worse, just different. Francesca looked up, spotting him. "There's Papa," she told Hope, who gurgled and waved her arms in excitement. Austin crossed to them, dropping a kiss on Francesca's upturned face before scooping up Hope, who squealed in delight. "How are my girls today?" he asked, settling on the blanket with the baby on his lap. "Wonderful," Francesca said, sitting back on her heels, a smudge of dirt on her cheek. "Hope rolled over all by herself this morning." "Is that right?" Austin asked the baby, who responded by grabbing at his mustache. "Quite an accomplishment for someone who's not yet 5 months old." Francesca joined them on the blanket, leaning against Austin's shoulder. "I had a visitor today," she said. "Dr. Hammond." Austin raised an eyebrow in surprise. While the doctor had been more respectful since Francesca's illness, he still maintained a professional distance. "He asked if I would consider assisting him," Francesca continued. "Apparently, Mrs. Holloway is thinking of retiring, and he needs someone with knowledge of women's health issues." Austin studied her face. "And what did you say?" "I said I'd consider it," she replied. "It would mean using Pa's medical knowledge again, helping people." She glanced at Hope. "And setting an example for our daughter about what women can do." Pride swelled in Austin's chest. "I think it's a fine idea if it's what you want." Francesca's smile was radiant. "I do. Not full-time, I want to be here for Hope, but a few days a week, perhaps." Austin nodded, bouncing Hope on his knee. "Then you should do it. We'll manage." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching as the sun began to set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Hope eventually dozed off, her head resting against Austin's chest. "Are you happy, Austin?" Francesca asked suddenly, her voice soft. "With how things turned out, with just us and Hope?" Austin looked down at the sleeping baby, then at his wife, her face earnest in the fading light. "Happier than I ever thought possible," he answered truthfully. "Are you?" Francesca was quiet for a moment, considering. "I still think of them sometimes," she admitted. "The babies we lost, I wonder who they might have been." Her hand drifted to her abdomen, an unconscious gesture. "But then I look at Hope, and I think perhaps things work out as they're meant to. She needed a family, and we needed her." Austin shifted Hope to one arm so he could wrap the other around Francesca. "You know, when I was holding you that night when you were bleeding, I made all sorts of bargains with God, promised anything if he'd just let you live. What did you promise?" Francesca asked, curious. "That I'd be grateful for whatever life gave us as long as it included you," Austin said simply. "That you were enough for me, always have been, always will be." He kissed her forehead. "Hope is a blessing I didn't dare ask for, but you, Franny, you're my heart." Tears glimmered in Francesca's eyes, but they were different from the tears of grief she had shed in the winter. These were tears of contentment, of a happiness hard-won through suffering. "You're my heart, too," she whispered, leaning up to kiss him properly. As summer bloomed in the mountains, so did the Morgan family. Hope took her first steps in July, toddling precariously from Austin to Francesca in their sun-dappled garden. Francesca began working with Dr. Hammond 2 days a week, earning both income and respect from the community. Austin continued at the mine, but with a promotion to foreman that meant better pay and slightly less dangerous work. In August, as Hope approached her first birthday, Francesca received a letter from Mrs. Abernathy in Central City. She opened it with trembling hands, Austin watching her face carefully. "Sarah's getting married," she announced, looking up from the page. "To a young shopkeeper who knows about Hope and doesn't mind Sarah's past." Relief and happiness mingled in Austin's chest. They had wondered about the brave young woman who had given them their daughter, hoping she had found some happiness of her own. "Mrs. Abernathy says she asked after Hope," Francesca continued, her voice soft. "Wanted to know that she's well and happy." "What will you tell her?" Austin asked. Francesca looked over at Hope, who was stacking and knocking over wooden blocks Austin had made for her, laughing each time they fell. "The truth," she said. "That hope is loved beyond measure, that she's brought us more joy than we ever imagined possible." She met Austin's eyes, that were grateful every day for her courage. That night, after Hope was asleep in the small bedroom they had added to the cabin that spring, Austin and Francesca sat on their porch, watching the stars appear over the mountains. Francesca leaned against Austin's shoulder, his arm around her waist. "I've been thinking," she said after a comfortable silence. "A dangerous pastime," Austin teased, pressing a kiss to her hair. Francesca elbowed him gently. "I'm serious. I've been thinking about family, about how it's made." Austin waited, sensing she had more to say. "There are other children who need homes," she continued carefully. "Children older than Hope, orphans from the influenza outbreak last winter or from mining accidents." Austin studied her face in the dim light. "You're thinking about adopting again?" Francesca nodded, a hint of uncertainty in her expression. "Not right away. Hope is still so young and we're just finding our balance. But someday, perhaps, a brother or sister for her." She hesitated. "What do you think?" Austin considered, picturing their small cabin filled with more laughter, more chaos, more love. "I think," he said slowly, "that we have plenty of love to give, and that any child would be lucky to call you mother." Francesca's smile was like the sunrise. "And to call you father." "Then someday," Austin agreed, "when the time is right, we'll expand our family again." He pulled her closer. "But for now, let's enjoy what we have. It's more than enough." They sat in contented silence, the mountain air crisp around them, the sounds of the sleeping town a gentle backdrop. From inside the cabin came Hope's soft snuffling, the peaceful sleep of a child secure in her parents' love. "You know," Austin said thoughtfully, "when I rode into Georgetown 4 years ago, I was looking for silver, thought I'd make my fortune in the mines." "And instead you found me," Francesca teased. "Poor bargain." Austin turned to her, suddenly serious. "The best bargain of my life," he corrected. "The silver will run out someday, all mines play out eventually, but what we've built, this family, that's a treasure that lasts." Francesca's eyes shone in the moonlight. "When did you get so wise, Cowboy?" "Around the same time I fell in love with a stubborn healer who charged me $1 to stitch up my friend," he replied with a grin. Francesca laughed, the sound carrying on the night air. "Best dollar you ever spent." "Indeed it was, Mrs. Morgan," Austin agreed, drawing her into a kiss that held all the promise of their future. "Indeed it was." The years passed, as they always do, marked by the changing seasons and the milestones of their growing family. Hope's first birthday was celebrated with a small party that the whole town seemed to attend, bringing gifts and good wishes for the little girl who had become Georgetown's favorite daughter. By her second birthday, she was talking in complete sentences. Her intelligence and curiosity, a source of constant pride and occasional exasperation for her parents. True to their discussion, when Hope was 3, Austin and Francesca opened their home to another child, a 7-year-old boy named William, whose parents had died in a mine collapse in a neighboring town. Withdrawn and grief-stricken at first, Will gradually blossomed under the patient love of the Morgans. Hope, delighted with her new big brother, followed him everywhere, and Will's protective instincts toward his little sister helped heal his wounded heart. 2 years later, they completed their family with the adoption of Emma, a 4-year-old orphaned by the influenza epidemic that had swept through Colorado. With her golden curls and sunny disposition, Emma brought a new dimension of joy to the Morgan household, though her arrival coincided with a period of adjustment as their cabin suddenly seemed too small for a family of 5. Austin's increasing responsibilities at the mine had brought greater prosperity, allowing them to purchase land on the edge of Georgetown and build a proper house, nothing ostentatious, but a solid two-story home with enough bedrooms for the children and a special room for Francesca's expanding medical practice. By 1889, 10 years after that fateful night when they had nearly lost everything, Dr. Hammond had officially taken Francesca on as his partner, impressed by her natural healing abilities and the knowledge she had continued to expand through study and practice. On a warm evening in June of that year, Austin sat on the porch of their home, watching as Francesca supervised the children in the garden. Hope, now 10, was reading a book while keeping an eye on 7-year-old Emma, who was chasing butterflies with undiminished enthusiasm. Will, 14 and lanky, was chopping wood, proud of his growing strength and eager to contribute to the household. Austin marveled at the tableau before him, at the family they had created from loss and heartache. He thought of that night, a decade earlier, when he had held Francesca as she bled, when he had told her she was enough. He had meant it then, with every fiber of his being. He hadn't known that those words would be the foundation upon which they would build this unexpected, beautiful life. Francesca caught his eye and smiled, excusing herself from the children to join him on the porch. At 36, she was more beautiful to him than ever, the passing years adding character to her face without diminishing its loveliness. A few strands of silver threaded through her dark hair, matching the ones that had appeared in Austin's own hair and mustache. "You're looking thoughtful," she observed, settling beside him on the porch swing. "Just counting my blessings," Austin replied, taking her hand in his. "They're numerous." Francesca followed his gaze to their children. "Indeed they are. Do you ever wonder," Austin asked carefully, "what might have been? If things had gone differently that night?" Francesca was quiet for a moment, considering. "Sometimes," she admitted. "I wonder about the children we might have had by birth, what they would have looked like, who they would have become." She squeezed his hand. "But then I look at Hope, Will, and Emma, and I can't imagine our family any other way. These are the children we were meant to have, Austin." "I believe that now." Austin nodded, understanding completely. "You know, when I said you were enough for me, I meant it. I would have been content just the two of us." "I know you would have," Francesca said softly. "That's one of the countless reasons I love you." "But this," Austin continued, gesturing to their home, their children, the life they had built, "this is beyond anything I could have imagined for us. Sometimes I think about that young cowboy who rode into Georgetown, so sure he knew what he wanted out of life." "Silver and fortune," Francesca recalled with a smile. "Such limited ambitions," Austin said, shaking his head at his younger self. "I had no idea what real wealth looked like." From the garden came the sound of children's laughter as Emma finally captured her butterfly, only to release it a moment later at Will's gentle instruction. Hope looked up from her book, smiling at her siblings' antics. "Neither did I," Francesca confessed. "When my father died and I was left alone, I thought independence was all I needed, that I could be complete unto myself." She looked at Austin, her eyes soft with memory. "Then you barged into my life with your injured friend and your skeptical attitude about women's medicine." Austin laughed. "Not my finest moment." "On the contrary," Francesca disagreed. "It was the beginning of our finest moments." As the sun began to set over the mountains, casting long shadows across their garden, Austin reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The path had not been straight or easy. There had been grief and loss, adjustments and challenges. Each child they had welcomed had brought their own needs and wounds, requiring patience and understanding as they became a family in truth as well as name. But through it all, the foundation had remained solid. The love between Austin and Francesca, forged in that terrible night of loss and affirmed in countless days since. "You're enough for me." 4 simple words that had carried them through darkness into a light brighter than either could have anticipated. "Mama, Papa," Emma's voice called from the garden. "Come see, we'll found a nest with baby birds." Francesca stood, pulling Austin to his feet. "Duty calls, Mr. Morgan." Austin wrapped an arm around her waist as they descended the porch steps. "The best kind of duty, Mrs. Morgan." As they crossed the garden to where their children gathered around a low tree branch, Austin sent up a silent prayer of gratitude. For the woman beside him, for the children who called them parents, for the life they had built from the ashes of loss. It wasn't the life he had planned, it was immeasurably better. And as the Morgan family huddled together in the golden evening light, watching tiny birds in their nest, Austin knew with absolute certainty that he had found the truest fortune a man could hope for. Not in the silver veins of Georgetown's mines, but in the love of the family he and Francesca had created, one heartbeat at a time.